In this lecture, we're going to review some factors that influence how wages are determined. We'll look and list the major causes of wage differentials. We'll discuss how minimum wage laws affect labor markets. And we'll identify the types, benefits, and cost of pay-for-performance plans, like commissions and bonuses. As an introduction, I want to emphasize that the general level of wages differ among nations and occupations for a number of basic reasons. Capital formation and innovation, the real enablers of labor productivity, are different among countries, industry sectors, and different among firms. Industry structure, or how firms differ their mix of resource inputs to deliver products and services, can influence wages. Some industries have unions, others do not. Finally, and significantly, differences in wages are the result of differences in talent level, education, and personal motivation. Everybody is not blessed with the same level of skills. Let's start by reviewing the power of unions and asking, are unions successful at increasing wages versus non-union workers? Yes, they are. Wages are 15% higher on average based upon studies. However, there are consequences. Unemployment is higher than would be the case in a perfectly competitive market. Union members would say that this is an acceptable trade-off. Unions can become too powerful. They can become myopically focused on just their members' needs and not the consequences for all stakeholders in the business, customers, distributors, suppliers. Thus, a union could hurt the company and stakeholders by asking for more wages and benefits than the company can realistically deliver. Firms may provide more than they should rather than face a strike or a loss of production. The union can demand so much that employees ultimately lose their jobs. If you don't believe this is realistic, just look at the loss of jobs when General Motors went bankrupt. Remember, we work and live in a global market, not just a United States market. Another firm is always willing to step in and take business away from an uncompetitive firm. Finding the right company, worker, stakeholder balance is an important task successfully accomplished by great leaders. Another topic. What should the minimum wage be? This question has generated debate and controversy for some time. Perhaps Benjamin Harrison, 23rd President of the United States, can give us some direction with his quote, "I pity the man who wants a coat so cheap that the man or woman who produces the cloth shall starve in the process." Interesting quote. Today, the minimum wage in the United States is $7.25 an hour and has been a federal standard since 2009. How does this compare to other workers in the United States? The wage is about 38% of the median income of all workers in the United States. The minimum wage is significantly below the $26 hourly private rate in the United States and far below the rate paid to manufacturing workers. Some states have recognized that the federal standard is too low. 28 states now have a minimum wage that is higher than the federal standard. Likewise, President Obama increased the minimum wage for workers under government contracts to $10.10 per hour in 2014. Some economists have made arguments against the minimum wage. They argue that increasing the cost of labor will reduce the demand for labor, that people will lose their jobs. They have also indicated that increasing the minimum wage is not the mechanism to solve the poverty problem in the United States. My own point is that you could potentially get a labor quality mix shift, hiring more qualified people at the expense of the less qualified. Imagine the extreme case where the minimum wage goes up to $15 an hour in 1 year, and that certain sectors of business have a labor-intensive process. Employers would change their view of the current labor's marginal product. They would now have a need to double the marginal product of all of their workers to maintain their cost position. Would they wait for demand for their products to go up? Probably not. An alternative, they'll begin to look for employees that are better trained and have higher marginal product, more productivity. They'll look for more qualified employees, upgrading the quality and putting lower trained workers out of a job. I think those would be unintended consequences of raising the minimum wage. The module has a folder of elective readings covering the consequences of increasing the minimum wage. Others have made the case for the minimum wage rate. Many analysts assume a competitive market when there isn't one. In some cases, employers do have monopsony power. When monopsony conditions exist, the minimum wage is at least a counter to some of the monopolists' wage-making power. The minimum wage could support processes that also increase productivity, as firms try to offset the wage increase through capital improvements like self-ordering kiosks. A more important reason, it helps with retention. Workers earning $7.25 an hour will walk across the street to earn $8 an hour. Firms suffer from high worker turnover. Thus, a good minimum wage can eliminate employee turnover. What's the evidence and actual experience of the minimum wage and increases in the minimum wage? Most studies have shown there is not a drastic decrease in employment when the minimum wage was increased. However, the federal increase since 1978 has never been more than $1 per hour. The minimum wage has helped low-income workers that are not represented by a union. That's a good thing. As an aside, having a static minimum wage for over 5 years is probably not a good idea. Having a method of adjustment to maintain purchasing power is an idea worth getting done. One of the important learnings from this lecture should be that labor demand and wages depend on the productivity of labor. The United States labor force has been very productive due to a number of factors. Plentiful capital and investment that supports labor producing more. We know that when labor produces more, they get a higher wage. Abundant natural resources that allow for new firms to form. Firms employ the latest technology. U.S. workers are healthy and well trained. And skilled management operates in an environment that is relatively low risk. Historically, U.S. labor has benefited from this overall environment. But that doesn't mean that everybody gets the same wage. There are significant wage differentials in the United States. What explains these differentials? Nothing magic here. The demand for and supply of labor. On the demand side, wage differentials can be explained by the marginal revenue productivity of the employee. What contribution does the employee make towards the revenue of the firm? A retail clerk may contribute a certain level of sales to a store. A surgeon will deliver a different level of revenue, and a pitcher who can throw a baseball 100 miles an hour and does not allow many home runs may bring in a different level of revenue for a baseball club. Janitors working in a retail store or hospital, or a manager of a baseball team, may not bring in the same revenue working at the same location. The second reason is the demand for products or services that the firm is selling. Large companies with increasing demand for their products will pay better than firms that have sales declines every year. Supply-side differences also matter. Workers are not homogeneous. Marketing and advertising people working for a retail outlet with a high sales revenue may get paid more than the executives in charge of inventory management for the same retail firm. Neither can do the job of the other. They're non-competing groups. But one group is deemed more valuable than the other of the firm. Supply is not interchangeable. So you can imagine that in manufacturing organizations that produce a lot of stuff, the people that understand the manufacturing process would have a tendency to be paid higher than marketing and advertising people. The key is the manufacturing. The value added is in the manufacturing. Other firms that are a little more finessed, a little more organized around marketing and brand and promotion and explaining the product to customers and differentiating from their competitors, well, that's where the marketing and advertising folks probably make more than the manufacturing folks. Especially, a lot of those firms have the manufacturing outsourced anyways. So, a little bit here on the supply side depends on the culture, the value added of the firm, and you need to look at that in terms of the supply side difference. Some groups are just better trained and educated. They bring skills to an organization that are superior to other groups. They expect to be paid more. Students working to get an MBA completely understand this. Finally, there are compensating differences in wages. Think risk. Think cyclical employment. Oil workers on a rig in the middle of Gulf of Mexico make more money than the workflow organizer at an oil company. Here's a chart on wage differentials in the United States. Kind of enlightening here. Surgeons get paid $235,000 per year. Airline pilots, $120,000. Fast food clerks make $19,000. Not difficult to understand how the marginal revenue product, education and training, and skill plays a role in these wage differentials. Focusing specifically on education, there's a direct relationship between the level of wages and education level. The higher the education, the more people are paid because they bring higher skills to the job. This wage differential is maintained, as you can see, over time. Finally, difference in wages happen due to other factors. Job information is not transparent, although increasing information on the internet is eliminating this bias. Likewise, people don't like to move. There may be a job for $25 an hour in California, higher than the $17 per hour that an employee is making in Michigan. The person may not find it beneficial just to pack up everybody and move to California. We've already discussed that unions have higher wages than comparable non-union jobs. By the way, they get more benefits too. Unfortunately, discrimination, whether age, sex, religion, and race, still exists in the marketplace. This factor creates wage differentials, sometimes without worker awareness. The data folder in the module includes the latest information on wage differentials for the United States. I'd like to conclude the lecture by focusing specifically on pay for performance. The models of wage determination we have described assume that worker pay is always a standard amount for each period worked, for example, $15 per hour. Yet, work pay plans are much more complex, especially among workers who receive an annual salary or extensive fringe benefits or some type of bonus based upon company performance. A pay for performance scheme. Let's look at some of the issues surrounding pay for performance. A firm has many stakeholders. However, the owners, principals, and workers, including management, can have different interests or objectives. When different interests exist between those two, it is referred to as a principal-agent problem. Management and workers do not always have the owner's best interest in mind. Owners of the business try to align the interest of workers and owners with the following reward system. Let's look at a couple of them. Piece rates. Although this is diminishing in popularity, piece rates is a system where people get paid directly for the output they produce. A farm worker gets paid a certain amount for every bushel of apples that are picked. A clothing worker gets paid for every shirt produced. Others include commissions and royalties to salespersons or artists. These attempt to align the interests of the principal and the worker. This way, if the owners sell more, the workers get paid a percentage of the growth. Bonus Stock options and profit sharing are incentive methods to ensure that management and workers are doing all they can for the good of the company. You want assembly line workers to think they work for Ford Motor Company, not the United Auto Workers. Pretty simple stuff, but it took years to implement union bonuses. Efficiency wages can take two forms: incentive to produce more output or incentives to reduce cost, or both. Bottom line, an approach that says to the worker, if the owners win, you get to share in the winnings. This approach is also applicable to other stakeholders, like major suppliers to the firm. It's win-win, not win-lose. Sounds good, right? Owners always need to look for potential downsides to these incentive plans. Here are some of the major ones. Deteriorating quality, because the incentives are for output only. It's a big no-no. Any incentive program has to include quality. Fraud, outright cheating to make the numbers. Think Volkswagen or Wells Fargo or Enron. Massive fraud among white-collar workers. Not in the interests of the company. Looking out for their bonuses, for their reward system. The company and the workers were not aligned. A tendency to stress individual performance rather than group performance. The One Ford concept developed during the last 10 years was intended to communicate that nobody wins unless we all win. Reduced turnover resulting from above-market pay. This could lead to creative stagnation. Jack Welch, former CEO of General Electric, maintained that it was best to cut the bottom 10% of performers every year, no matter what. The lecture conclusion here? Wages are not the same. And there are some very good reasons why this is so.